Welcome to the Armstrong and Getty Show. This from the text line. Tim Sandefur spoke on one of my college courses because his first book, Property Rights in the 21st Century, I don't know if I could read that with a gun to my head, no offense, was part of our assigned reading.
You should read Gun Rights in the 21st Century first.
He was great, and I love his book. I'm looking forward to reading his new book. He's a great choice for a guest.
Tim Sandefur, principal attorney at the Pacific Legal Foundation. You've heard him many times on our show as Tim the Lawyer, talking about freedom. And indeed, the book is The Right to Earn a Living, Economic Freedom in the Law. By the way, the full title of that other book is Cornerstone of Liberty, Property Rights in the 21st Century America. Tim, howdy.
Thanks for having me on.
How many years you been calling the show?
I think only about 2, actually.
Really?
Well, I've been listening. I've been listening to you forever.
You loom large in our consciousness. Sir.
Well, thank you.
We get emails and calls about you when you call. So, I mean, you're that big a deal.
Proof I need a radio show of my own.
Yeah, probably.
The Right to Earn a Living. Tell us about the book.
The book is about various ways in which the government restricts our right to economic choice. When you talk about the right to earn a living and economic freedom, a lot of people think you're making an economic argument or you're talking about technical concepts of supply and demand. And what we're talking about instead is actually just freedom of choice. We hear freedom, that term thrown around in all sorts of different realms, from abortion rights to health care and so forth. Well, I'm talking about the right of each individual to decide what jobs to take, what to earn for those jobs, how long to work in those jobs, whom to employ, whom to hire, that sort of thing. And unfortunately, that right, although it was respected not only by America's founders, but also by common law courts as far back as the 17th century, unfortunately, today, courts generally turn their back. They just don't care. And so what happens is legislatures are free to do whatever they want and to intrude on that freedom pretty much at will.
Well, what are some good examples of some pretty obvious easy to understand freedoms that we have lost over time?
Well, for example, I'm working on a case I filed last month in Missouri where my client wants to run a moving business. Well, in Missouri, if you want to run a moving business, you first have to get a license. And if you want a license, you first have to get permission from all of the existing moving businesses.
That's insane.
And surprisingly enough, the other moving businesses aren't really willing to allow you to compete
sign up for more competition.
Exactly. And unfortunately, this kind of restriction is on the books in most, virtually every state and in most metropolitan areas.
How did it get there?
Well, it goes back to the New Deal, when there was a fashionable theory of economics, which today I think every competent economist has rejected, which is the idea that competition is a bad thing. And the reason competition is a bad thing is because it drives down prices. So pretty soon prices drive down to zero, and then all the businesses go out of business, and then you don't have any companies anymore, which is obviously stupid.
Right.
But that was the prevailing theory behind a lot of the New Deal era restrictions that were enacted both at the state and federal level in the 1930s. We talk about the New Deal. A lot of people think you're talking about just what FDR did from the federal level, but actually a lot of these restrictions were implemented at the state level as well, and they require businesses to get permission from existing companies in order to prevent too much competition. Well, competition is a good thing.
And if I were, I hate to single out any company because I have no idea if they're complicit, but if Joe's Movers is a monster, you see my vans all over the place, I would pay dearly, Tim, for legislators to advocate and pass that law.
Exactly.
Would I not?
Exactly. I always say that Target could make a lot more money if it could make Walmart's illegal. And businesses do this all the time. And the reason why is it gets actually to a very important point, which is that the poor and members of the underclass and entrepreneurs, they're the ones who need free markets the most. It's really a shame that in this country, a lot of people think that free markets are only good for evil big businesses and greedy capitalists.
You hear that all the time in California.
They're the ones who hate free markets the most and try to use government to block competition the most. Entrepreneurs don't have the kind of political influence necessary to get the government to do what they want, right? And so it's people, it's small businesses like my client Mike Muni. You know, he runs a small business. He has maybe 3 or 4 trucks that move people around. He's not Atlas Van Lines. He can't call up the legislature and get them to protect him from fair competition. It's the big businesses that exploit the government and exploit its coercive powers so that they no longer have to satisfy consumers. In a free market, businesses succeed if they satisfy consumers. In a regulated market, businesses succeed if they have political influence and pull.
What do you consider yourself? Where do you consider yourself on the political spectrum?
I'm a libertarian.
And how did you get there? You just born that way?
I read a lot. Actually, when I was a kid, I encountered Thomas Jefferson, and I just became fixated on Jefferson and read everything I could about him. And that led me then to other libertarian thinkers like Ayn Rand, John Locke, and others.
You a Milton Friedman fan?
To a great degree, yes. I mean, I think some of his arguments aren't quite as strong as they could have been. You know, he invented the withholding tax.
Right.
Which he later regretted, correct? He did. He later regretted that.
Yeah, we've all made mistakes.
A break.
Right.
I've made mistakes. I got married. You probably shouldn't have.
But his book, Free to Choose, and the TV series Free to Choose, which you can get on YouTube, is fantastic, especially the chapter on who protects the consumer. And he makes this point. It's the consumer who is best suited to protect the consumer and ought to protect the consumer.
Let me do a plug for that. If you're the sort of person you're interested in this sort of stuff, but like you think, boy, a big, thick book, I don't know if I could do that. Look that up on YouTube, that Milton Friedman stuff, the Free to Choose. Really interesting. Be a good introduction. It would probably lead you to your book.
And his book is very easy to read too. It's not a technical economic book at all.
Timothy Sandefur is with us. He's Tim the Lawyer, author of The Right to Earn a Living, Economic Freedom in the Law. You stated an earthquake-like position there. And it went by kind of quickly, but it's incredibly unpopular in California in particular. Economic freedom benefits the little guy.
Absolutely.
The lower achievers, the lower earners among them.
That's right. Take taxi cabs, for instance. Most cities in this country regulate taxi cabs in the same way that the moving company thing is, where you have to get permission from existing taxi cabs to get a license. Well, taxi cab licenses are extremely hard to get. About 10 years ago, I did research in Miami-Dade County, and at that time, a taxi license cost about $15,000 to operate a single cab. In New York City now, it's about $500,000 to get a license to operate a single taxi cab. And you know what? It ain't rich white guys driving taxi cabs. 100 years ago, you could take your Model T and you could paint on the side of it taxi, and you could start earning fair money for doing a fair day's work by taking people from one destination to another.
Right.
But existing established taxi companies have gained control over the government system that regulates taxi cabs, and they exploit that power for their own benefit.
All right, we've got a minute left. Tell people, and I'm pretty sure I read this in your book, the difference, the number of fields for which you needed a license, say 30, 40 years ago, and the number of fields for which you need a government permit, a license today.
I don't remember what it was 40 years ago, but today 1/3 of all Americans need a license to pursue their profession.
Because it used to be like 1 in 50.
Yeah, and the California Handbook for Occupational Licensing that just lists the occupations you need a license for is 300 pages long.
We have a license, right? Do we still? We used to have to have
I have a license, I have a bar license, and the bar exists to prevent fair competition in the law so that I don't lower my prices. That's the only reason that the California bar exam exists. It's not to ensure competent lawyers. I know too many lawyers.
You could although you could stretch an argument to justify the need for a license for lawyers. Just grant me that.
I don't think you can.
How about for freaking braiding hair?
Well, yeah,
braiding hair!
I think you can.
What's going to happen?
I think you can come up with a reason why you need to have a license, not the government license, though. I think you could have a private group do that.
More with Tim Sandefur in a moment or two. We're getting fired up. Maybe join us. We're going to march at noon.
Braiding hair, you have to have a license.
I don't know where we're going to march and what we're going to say, but damn it, we're going to march.
You are sticking around.
We're being enslaved.
You're going to stick around. You're going to keep ranting and raving. This is going to be awesome. Stay with us. You're listening to the Armstrong and Getty Show.
More with Tim Sandefur, lawyer, author of The Right to Earn a Living, Economic Freedom in the Law. This is our old friend Tim the Lawyer. Kicking it. Jefferson style, baby. Freedom. Stay tuned. Get fired up.
Interesting, important stuff. It's news time at 9 o'clock. Armstrong and Getty Show. I'm Jack Armstrong. He's Joe Getty. I feel like I sort of feel like Glenn Beck's TV show, like where he says, "You DVR this for the whole family. Watch it a couple of times before you air it for your children
and your grandchildren,
and then transcribe it and then rewatch it again. Come on, follow me. We've got a lot of learning to do." I feel like that today, because our guest is in that category of we could actually learn something here.
Timothy Sandefur, lawyer, author of The Right to Earn a Living, Economic Freedom in the Law. Our old friend Tim the Lawyer, Pacific Legal Foundation, is with us. How the hell did freedom get pushed out to become some sort of fringe political stance?
Well, the process began actually almost 100 years ago with the rise of the progressive movement. The progressives were a group of intellectuals who believed that all that talk from the founding fathers about natural rights was all just unscientific superstition, and that actually individual rights are given to you by government for the government's own purposes in order to make society nice. Well, once you accept that premise, it's very easy then for the government to say, well, we're going to rearrange what rights you have or alter them or change them. The famous progressive Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis once said, property and other rights of the individual must be remolded from time to time to meet the changing needs of society. Right. Well, if it can be remolded, it's not a right. So as soon as you accept the premise that government can tell you what kind of rights you have and rearrange them to suit society's needs, you're basically holding that there are no individual rights. And that is true both in the economic realm and the non-economic realm. I mean, and yet today, I mean, you'd be horrified if somebody said, well, the government can rearrange your freedom of religion to suit the needs of society. Right. I mean, we did that 500 years ago, and we saw how horrible that was. And yet, when it comes to private property or the right to earn a living at a fair occupation, we allow government to intrude and rearrange the market and tell people what kind of businesses they can do and that sort of thing, so that we today have a society where it's easier to get a welfare check than a paycheck in a lot of cities.
Is government just designed in such a way that it's going to grow and that's just the way it is? Or do people get into government and they actually become... I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, are people doing this on purpose because they're evil, bad people?
No. This is a wonderful insight of a couple economists named James Buchanan and Gordon Tullock, and they won the Nobel Prize for this insight, which is today called public choice theory. What public choice theory is the analysis of how laws are passed in terms of economics, and that is, economics is like any other product or service. I mean, legislation is like any other product or service. There's a demand for it, and there's going to be a supply for it, and people are going to trade it. And so, if the government can redistribute wealth or opportunities from one group of people to another, well, that power, the power to redistribute wealth, is worth a lot of money, right? And so people are going to invest their time and money to persuade the government to do that for them. And of course, they're going to tell everybody, well, we're doing this because this is for the general public. Certainly, it's good to outlaw Walmarts because Walmarts are so bad for small towns and mom and pop stores. And so we're outlawing Walmart out of the goodness of our hearts, even though what they're really doing is saying that you are going to be forced to pay more for the products that you need in order to suit them, right? But they don't say it that way. What they say is, oh, no, this is for the general public. And so there's a demand for this legislation. And the cost of that legislation is imposed on a large number of people very broadly. So there's no demand against it, right? So, for example, in eminent domain, Costco spends millions and millions and millions of dollars sending people to city council meetings to say, steal these people's property and give it to us and we'll build a Costco store there. And you politicians will look great because you've created jobs and improved the economy, and we'll make a lot of money at our store.
And everybody who doesn't live in that land currently likes a Costco.
Exactly. They don't care. Whereas there's no lobbying pressure on the opposite side, because the chances of your house being taken away are pretty small.
Right.
And you would have to go down to the city council every day and say, please don't steal my house. And then the next day, please don't steal my house. And then the next day, please don't steal my house. Nobody has the time to do that. So instead what we do is we get together and we write a document that says, the city may not steal my house and give it to Costco. And now the problem is solved, and you don't have to lobby the city council. And that document is called the Constitution of the United States.
Right, unless Justice Brandeis comes along and says, exactly. Costco's awfully cool. Let's relook at this.
Exactly. And then Kelo versus New London comes along and tears that protection away. And now what are you going to do? Now you have to compete in the political process against Costco? You're not going to compete in the political process against these organizations. Mm-hmm. It's not that these people are evil. It's that the institution is set up to create a one-way sort of ratchet system where politicians think that the general public wants more and more wealth redistribution because that's all they're hearing from the people who come and visit them at their offices. But of course, the reason those people come to visit them at their offices is because they stand to gain something from it. You and I, who don't stand anything to gain from it, we don't have the time to lobby the government not to steal our stuff, and we shouldn't have to.
Right. Tim Sandefur is with us.